Congratulations. It was one of those mornings where it's like, oh, it's 6 a.m. and we're just running to the races. But I've been so excited to chat with you. I know we met at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference
Yeah,
through.
that's right. It was through Christine Cranley from Texas Blockchain Council. That was
Yeah.
who introduced us. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I signed up for your newsletter, and I'm going to be really candid with you here. I sort of looked at it and I thought, oh God, is this going to be some left-wing feminist moan fest? Let's check it out. I swear to you, that was what I thought. And then I started reading it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so strange. It's like you can't categorize this thing. It's such in a good way. I mean, it's just I was reading it, and I was like, you start reading and you kind of form a sort of an opinion about you, and then it changes, and then it's like, oh, she said this, and oh, I really find it hard to describe. And I'll be honest, I found it a little bit hard to prepare for this call because I was like, I don't even know where to start asking questions to this girl.
I mean, I think it's funny. I didn't post on Tuesday, and I made a two-part kind of diatribe on Barbie and the response that so many people have had to the movie. And the funny thing is, I haven't even seen the movie. I'm just responding to everyone around me. And I'm in this in-between world where my friends from New York, are coming at everything from a very different standpoint than some of my more conservative Bitcoin friends or just other conservative friends. So I'm kind of caught in the crosshairs. And I would say it's maybe ambling, and I'm my own editor. So I thought, am I saying something clear to other people in this, or am I just getting all of my stream of consciousness out on paper? And so I ended up not posting on Tuesday, and I'm sitting with it a little bit to just simmer. But
Yeah.
I think you point out pretty kindly that, well, how do you describe it? Like how is it easily? And maybe it's been a little broad for me to just have a place to, I don't know, to just say things and so far not risk tons of consequences. I haven't also been promoting it. I've just done it, and if I talk to people, maybe it comes up. It's linked
Yeah.
on my Twitter and Noster, but I'm not active on there. I'm not like pushing it. But it's maybe that's a great place to start. How do I categorize this? Anti-feminism sounds a little aggressive, and I think that's probably a lot of what some of the questioning is. It's like a deconstruction of feminism,
Mm.
but it also, I don't really like any of those words. So
I think part of the problem is the definition of feminism and what the word has come to mean for some people. So I think that probably is a good place to start. I was going to say before we do that, you should probably introduce yourself.
oh, hello. We just went right into it. Well, I am Mills, mononymously known as Mills. And I have been working in the Bitcoin space for almost 2 years, but I was film and television in New York City for the last 12 years before my almost 2 years in Nashville. So I left New York. I wanted freedom, and that's my one word answer of why I left and what I wanted. I did most of COVID there, and I've been, and I guess this is what we're kind of already jumping into. I started publishing in February writings that are not really about Bitcoin and not really about film and television, but more about the worldview and mindset that I had inherited just through the water, I think, in and living in society, but I never truly believed a lot of it. And then the past couple of years being in Nashville and being able to kind of unwind the metaphorical string ball of worldviews and ideologies and thoughts and beliefs that I'd been exposed to / force fed in New York, I wanted to share them. And my plan was to kind of see if there was any resonance, if anyone else was feeling how I was feeling. And also get my thoughts out there in the hopes of, organizing them into a book. And so I thought, what if I publish once a week a piece, and the ones that hit can be chapters, or maybe there's more to delve into. And I'd been writing about women and dating and relationships for so many years, and it's been this book that I know I have something to say, but how to say it in a way that is going to help people and not just be, self-congratulatory memoir essays. So
The life of Mills.
I know it's been an interesting, I've had an interesting go of it already. I'm very grateful, but.
Can you talk to me a bit about your Bitcoin journey? How did you become a Bitcoiner? When did that happen?
Yeah, that was through my brother, and he had come back to New York he wanted to actually just be a part of the Bitcoin community in New York City. And he had left a job in mainstream tech journalism and taught himself to code. And then he was like, can I crash with you while I get a job in developing and find a place? And it's like, absolutely. And that was February of 2020. And so I cannot even imagine, had he not been there, because it was going to be 6 weeks that he was going to stay with me. And then it was 6 months, or a little bit more. But that having a brother, having a friend, having someone, I lived alone with in Greenpoint. So it was just a life-changing experience, which meant that we were spending all day, every day together and doing our own, digestion of what was happening. And being in New York during COVID and during the lockdown, and then during the curfew and the marches, there was so much happening. And we also just went on lots of walks and talked, and he had just been learning different programming languages. And that was for him to just be able to process and talk to me. I actually wrote a piece about loving mansplaining, but like, it's so fun to hear when someone's super interested in something. And long story, but so Bitcoin was one of the things that he'd been very, very interested in, and had really encouraged me years prior to just do a dollar cost averaging automatic buy with Cash App. He was like, you can do this easy. You don't really have to know about Bitcoin. Just do this for me. He like pled with me. And then I think he said like do $50. And I was like, that's a lot. Maybe I could do 20 or 25 or something a week. And then during COVID, the New York City BitDevs paused for a while. So he had moved here for this Bitcoin community, and now the Bitcoin community is not, it's going through a new season, but they ended up starting to meet again. And when I say it was the only thing happening in New York, I almost felt, not almost, I honestly kind of snuck out of my apartment, because I left the place my brother had moved into with me. I left and he took that over, and I moved in with a friend, and she was very COVID conscious. And I don't think the thought of me going and hanging out with strangers without masks indoors, eating food, those were all the things that you're not supposed to do. So I wouldn't say I ever had to physically lie to her, but I led her probably to believe that my brother and I would work out a lot together. And so that I was just going over to his place for a workout, when in reality, we're going to a Bitcoin meetup. And that was really, I think, what turned me into a Bitcoiner versus someone that had Bitcoin and maybe didn't laugh at Bitcoin. But I also, at that point, I wouldn't say I had a deep knowledge of kind of the social implications and the ripples and the possible impacts of Bitcoin. But from a use, I thought, okay, all these people, a lot of the programming that would be talked about at BitDevs is Lightning and the development and what they're building on top of it. And that made sense to me. I loved just kind of being a very dry sponge, soaking up everything and not understanding a lot, but the guys were very gracious. And, I had the sister card, so I kind of just entered the Bitcoin scene as everybody's sister.
Wow. That's incredible. It's amazing to me how many people I talk to who got orange pilled over the COVID period. It just seems like that seems to have been a real life shift period for so many people on many levels. I don't know if you've seen the same.
Absolutely. I mean, I think any period of crisis, right, will bring out what you truly believe. And if you don't truly believe something, I mean, what good is it doing? And I think COVID, if people had faith in the government or in medical science or in, I don't know, even social norms, I think it was a good pressure test for people to really kind of take an inventory and stock of things. And I think a lot of people find hope in Bitcoin, and I draw a stark distinction between hope with Bitcoin or through Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is a fantastic tool that does actually provide an ability for saving for the future, an ability to have a little control. But I think there is a tendency in some to kind of put more saving power in Bitcoin rather than this is a vehicle that helps us, get away from the dumpster fire of the, financial destruction that it's pretty inextricably tied at this point with governments and politics. And so this was kind of the escape route. And I think COVID being that pressure cooker, a lot of people wanted something good to think about, and Bitcoin provided something pretty stable that did encourage people.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, where are you from originally in the US then? Because you said you lived 12 years in New York, but where was home before that?
I
If you
grew
can
up in
share it.
Washington State. Yeah, I don't necessarily it's funny, there's like things I share, things I don't. I grew up in Washington State, so spent the formative years. And it's funny, I actually grew up in right outside of Hanford, where currently Oppenheimer is very talked about in the Manhattan Project, and there are 4 locations. And Hanford was a location where they were, there's a nuclear reactor there, that the plutonium for the test bombs, and they would radiate, they honestly, it still blows my mind, but they would transport by train. After activating, they would move the plutonium to New Mexico via train, and then the bombs were assembled in New Mexico, which is a very wild concept that it kind of blows my mind a little bit. But the nuclear reactor, brought a lot of people to this town, and kind of is why that town is still around, is what it is. A lot of people stayed out there.
Hmm. And so, how did you find living in Nashville? Do you enjoy the culture there? Was that very different for you moving from New York?
I think it was the different that I wanted, and I wanted to not be the only one that thought something. And I can't think still if there's another, what I would call purple city in the US, at least. And, I think cities tend to be blue, even if they're in a red state. Typically, the city itself is very blue. And Nashville has, maybe it leans, slightly blue on the purple spectrum, but there was this ability to meet someone that they could be very conservative or they could be very liberal, but everyone is okay with that. Not tension. It doesn't feel like tension. It feels like, hey, we can have disagreement. We don't have to have this in common. And that felt like exactly the speed I was going for. The quality of life. I was just in New York this past week, and I don't miss how hard it is. And I feel like, kind of in hand with feminism, you have to protect yourself so much in New York. You kind of have to be vigilant, especially like I was a young woman living alone for the majority of my time in New York. And while very safe, and I felt safe. It now too, it's like I don't want to have to be thinking of my safety as actively as, I mean, I'm not trying to, be crazy and foolish, but for that to have to be something, oh, it's after 10 p.m. I need to take a cab. I'm not going to walk home, or I'm not going to take the train. Like, I had a lot of fail safes in my mind, but which is wise. I'm not saying that wasn't a good thing, but that just takes a lot of energy and drains you, I think, to really have to conserve rather than, and this is something I've been really exploring, just the feminine frame thrives when there is room to flourish. And I don't know how easy it is to flourish in New York, because to have a margin, you need to either be, I mean, I don't know, other than being very wealthy, I don't know how it would be possible to really have a slower pace of life where there isn't the hustle and there isn't the sensory overload, and you're working long hours and inevitably getting dinner late with friends, so you're probably also not sleeping as much, maybe you're commuting. Like, it's just all these things that I don't think contribute to an abundance. And I feel,
Oh, you've frozen. Mm.
phase two.
I lost you at I don't think these things contribute to an abundance. I think that was where I lost you.
Yeah, I find Nashville has a better threshold for flourishing. And it is, I think you can live anywhere. I think, the reason I was still interested in being in a city is more so the job and work that I've done. And I guess my logic, my rational side saying, don't just move out into the woods and a country house or into a farmhouse by yourself. Like, I definitely think, I'm not saying that, anything's impossible, but I thought the odds of me meeting someone to then leave the city made more sense than me going out into the country and then finding someone that just so happened to believe similar things, that wanted to raise a family and, be my life partner. So it just seemed like the statistics, maybe that's flawed thinking still. I feel I'm very much looking at the woods quite often. And I have a ceramic studio. I'm a member of a ceramic studio in the woods. So I get to like escape, and then I come back to the city. But it is nice to be in a walkable city, and people would not say Nashville is walkable. I've made it walkable and walk most places. I'll get an Uber every now and then or borrow a car, but for the most part, I can walk to everything. And I think having, knowing what makes you flourish as an individual, I think that's, probably different for different things. But I do know the constant drain and stress is not helpful in releasing, I think, the best parts that, bringing joy and honestly creativity and a lot of lightness. It's pretty hard to bring light when you're so weighed down. And I think New York just kind of does it to you. And I think Nashville, you can really choose your own path in a really nice way.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in New York for 6 years, and it did strike me that everybody seemed extremely neurotic there. There's just, and I think that's part of like the defense mechanism, as you say. I think you get very hardened to things, and it's all about kind of trying to squeeze everything you can into the day, and everything's very frenetic. And it almost becomes like a self-perpetuating thing where you just sort of almost like a drug, but like a not a healthy drug, and you don't feel good, but you're on this constant hamster wheel of like achievement and activity and always got to be busy and doing this and doing that. And yeah, I can see
Yeah.
what you mean. I mean, Nashville's a lovely city. It's got so much going on as well. I mean, it's got such a rich culture that I can see how you'd be happy there for sure. It's a nice place to be. So you recently moved from Bitcoin Magazine to Pubkey. I would love you to talk a little bit about what Pubkey is as well, for those that don't know. Like, what is that organization? What do they do, etc.?
The funny joke is that at least for the next month or so, I think it's still going to be a what is Pubkey? I think I just joined, and Pubkey's a bar, a dive bar, a very nice dive bar, but a dive bar that you could say is a Bitcoin bar. I think it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of the patrons do not know that it is a Bitcoin bar. There's
Oh.
paraphernalia on the wall, like a little shrine. There's the buy Bitcoin Janet Yellen sign framed, but like it's a bar. You can pay with regular money, but you can also pay with Lightning through 𝗧𝗿𝗍. But they opened in November, and their whole ethos was let's get the bar up and running and then start a media house. And so I am the beginning of that happening. And so I'm actually their director of content and partnerships for Pubkey Productions. So forthcoming, Pubkey will not just be a bar in New York City, a very great bar in New York City with excellent food. Honestly, it's really fun to work at a place that's very it's kind of, you have to explain it because people are like, you work at a bar? And I'm like, no, I know it's a bar that does more, but they have this really amazing ethos of third places. And there's your work space and your home space, but what is your third space? What is your community? What is a place that you go, that you belong, that you know people? And I think especially, COVID shifted so many things digitally, and I think the physical has really been making a comeback. I think if we wouldn't have been force fed so many Zoom hangouts, whatever, I think maybe it would still be on a slower trajectory. But I think it accelerated the fact that there is this hunger for just being in community with people in person, and it will not probably be the last Pubkey. There will probably be others in other places as well, but to have a meeting place, and it's cool. I was there a couple days ago, and just I was wrapping up work. I was the person with her laptop at the bar, and someone walked in that I knew. I had met initially at New York City Bit Devs. They'd been in Nashville for a few months, and then he just walked in to Pubkey, and I think he'd been there maybe once before. We hadn't talked for a while, and it was like, this is the shrinking of the world, because he's a Bitcoiner. He knows about the space. It's amazing to just, oh, I didn't plan it, didn't have to organize it, but I'm here, we can catch up. And I prefer, I'm not, I realize it's not a great thing, but I'm not amazing at my virtual communication with people, because I do prefer to be in
Yeah.
person or phone call. It's just always so much better. And that was a long answer that I could have more succinctly said. Pubkey is a Bitcoin dive bar in New York City, and they are launching a media house. But that's not a very fun answer.
Can you explain what you mean by launching a media house? Like, what's that actually going to look like? Because I know that Peter McCormack had hosted What Bitcoin Did episode there, so I remember listening to that, and he was saying that it was hosted at Pubkey, and then they also had, I guess it was a truck, really, wasn't it, at Bitcoin Miami?
Plus, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Yeah. So
The
can you
bus.
talk about?
Yeah. The media house portion. So upstairs, there's and that's where Peter McCormick was recording his podcast from. It's called the Parlor, and that's what we're calling it right now. I don't know if that will be the official public name of it, but it's a space where oh man, podcasts can be recorded, but also that not only for our podcasts, but a perfect example with Peter, he's in town, it's a place for him to post up. Thomas and Marty just did a rip last week, just like being able to have a space in New York, especially, I mean, you live there, space is very special, and to have it just above the bar is very convenient. When people come into town, they can record a podcast up there with Thomas, or we're also going to be, developing a program that will allow people to rent out the space and record their own podcasts there, not necessarily our themes and shows. So on that note, we are working on a few new shows, and they're not, I wouldn't say any but one are kind of a traditional podcast format, but kind of building out the initial bundle that will launch of the new shows to have one of each kind of variety of formatting, and then grow from there. So I guess a platform is maybe another way of saying it, but more than anything, there is not content. And when I say content, social media, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, I'd say maybe that category. There is not, or if there is, I've somehow missed it. There isn't content that is very accessible to non-Bitcoiners that has any Bitcoin education. Like, there are very technical, deep in the weeds, amazingly informative for the people that are choosing to kind of even identify themselves as a Bitcoiner. But for adoption to really happen and for growth, right, there has to be a majority of people that just use Bitcoin and that have a fundamental understanding of it. And so this content is for normal people. And I mean, that's such a lame sounding tagline, for normal people, but it's this void that I've seen in the space where we can't, I mean, we can, I suppose, but like, I feel like there's so many shows just made for Bitcoiners by Bitcoiners, which is really beautiful, but there isn't that warm, outstretched arm saying, hey, this is a very safe space to ask questions. This is basics, and you really don't need to know more than that. You can learn more than that. But this content to be entertaining, Thomas Bacci is the CEO, and he's like, it's the Barstool Sports for Bitcoin, and I think that is a very succinct way. I don't know that Barstool would appreciate, maybe they'd be so flattered.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm kind of class of like July 2021. And I think initially when you go down the rabbit hole, it's just like this, shocking, amazing, just really all consuming experience. And then I'd say more recently, I've started to feel like when I go on Twitter, I'm like, God, this is just an echo chamber. Like, it's an echo chamber of the same people following each other, saying the same things, posting the same stuff. And yeah, and you don't get a lot of normies there. And I'm just kind of like, it feels like there are two separate worlds. There's the Bitcoin world that thinks it's the entire world, and then there's the outside world that doesn't even know that it exists, or if it does, it's like a sort of fringe, kind of movement of people who've lost their minds. That's kind of a little bit how it feels. But yeah, so it's interesting. And on that note, actually, I was thinking, because I interview women in the space specifically as much as I can, because I just was listening to Bitcoin podcasts and going like, are there any women out here? Like, it's all men. And then I
There's a few.
realized that there are loads of women out there. I'll tell you what it is they just don't go on podcasts and talk about themselves and what they're doing the whole time.
A little bit more of a male incentive model. And I think Twitter too. Twitter is something that's a male, and the incentive model is masculine on Twitter. It's not an inherently feminine place to spout your opinions and get in these battles, like maybe a cute photo now and then, but like the reason I think also women aren't asked to speak at conferences is the lack of awareness that the conference organizers have, because most of them are men. And I'm not like, you've read my stuff. I'm not in any way a man-hating, woman, but I definitely, there are so many women that are incredible that I know from working in the space, and they don't get asked to speak. And it's not because they don't have value. It's because the men that are organizing it don't think of it in that way. And it's like, they're not going to fight their way. These women aren't going to, beat down the door. And so typically the women that are featured at the conferences are the influencer type and the more, social media following. And then a very few are these super exceptional technical women that are at the top of their field. But there's so many in between. And yet I don't love the discriminatory, like, I don't want, to just say women only, women can only do, I don't love the line, we need more women in Bitcoin. I think, we need more babies in Bitcoin. There's other things we need. But you're right, there really are a lot of women, but it is not the nature of women, I think, to be so self-promoting. And I think podcasts tend to kind of be more of a masculine, male-dominated field. So thank you for your service. I mean, because I wouldn't have asked you to do a podcast with me,
Well, I was actually thinking that you should start a podcast. So that was really funny, because did you see American Hoddle put out a tweet last night? And it's actually a really funny tweet. Let me see if I can find it and read it for you, because it just made me laugh so much. Well, because I co-founded Bitcoin Policy UK, and I just took the opportunity last night, because he made that comment to do a tweet about it. But it was just so funny what he said. Wait, let me see if I can find it. I'm going to have to edit out this bit of me doing a search here, but what's his handle again? Is it American Hoddle 8 or something? At
8, yeah,
Hoddle 8. Where is it? There he is. Yeah, it just made me laugh my ass off. He was like, he said, in my opinion, the number one thing Bitcoin needs in order to become a global reserve currency is more podcasts. Each of us should be recording 2 to 3 podcasts at any given time. Have you ever talked to someone about Bitcoin in real life? Guess what? That could have been a podcast. You blew it.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's a really well, I love a good satire. I
don't know. It
The
was so
funny
funny.
thing.
Yeah, sorry,
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, because we'd recorded this podcast for Bitcoin Policy UK that Daniel Prince's daughter Caitlin is hosting. And so I just took the advantage of using that, quoted it, and I said, you asked, we listened, we're proud to announce the launch.
Oh, well played. Way to just go on the heels of, man, I'm not really on social media very often. There's a lot of irony, I know, but I just don't find it very generative for me. But I will go on to retweet this. That's a very funny, that's a wise one. I actually had a conversation yesterday about the abundance of podcasts and how I realize I live, which not everyone does, and I have to, check my own privilege, that I am in the echo chamber and I am in real life community with people. So I have real life conversations, and something happens, we're talking about it. I realize that not everyone, and probably the majority of people don't have that and don't live, in that proximity. So I don't listen to podcasts really. I know that I don't know, do I lose my Bitcoiner card? I will listen to certain ones, but also if I was to listen to all the podcasts that my friends do, and I feel bad, I want to support them. I love them. But if I was to listen to all of them, I don't know how. I don't have the time of the day.
Yeah.
But also it's a lot of different angles, which is valuable, but it's a lot of different angles and perspectives on similar things, because there aren't that many different things happening in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So I just let the cream rise to the top. If I hear, I do listen. I feel this is very ironic that I'm saying on a podcast how I don't listen to podcasts, but I'll leave it there.
I was going to say though, it would be actually really fun if you did something at Pubkey, like a feminine agency fireside chat series or something like that. And it could be recorded as a podcast, but you could just but you could just do it like an in-person thing. Like I think that would be, and I totally take your point, by the way, about the like we need more women in this space, because I'm a bit kind of like, yes, we need more women in this space. But I also find it extremely frustrating where I'm a bit like, girls, like you can fucking come in this space when you want, like nobody's stopping you, you know what I mean? And I find it somewhat frustrating when I hear things like, oh, the Bitcoin world is misogynistic, it's not welcoming to women. That hasn't been my experience at all. But what I find is that women just don't seem to understand why it's interesting. Well, they don't, sorry, so that sounds very condescending. They don't seem to find it interesting. They
They
don't seem to
don't
find it.
they don't want to know more is the thing.
Yeah.
It's not that men, and this is what I hope I highlighted with New York City Bit Devs. The organizers were so supportive and kind. I'll never forget this moment of, I was one, there was one other woman, I think, at most of the meetups. Maybe I was the only woman, maybe there was one other, all men. And I remember being in a circle of 7 men, and I was mostly listening, but I started saying something, and another guy started talking over me, interrupted me. And I think I've already asked permission to share this before. So Jay, the organizer, he cuts this guy off and he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Mills was saying something. And when I tell you, I left that meetup thinking, the organizer, who is brilliant, who the way that he teaches, the way that it's incredible what he's done and built and poured into New York City Bit Devs. But I'm probably, that was maybe my second or third meetup. I'm such a baby. I'm asking probably a not very insightful question, but the welcoming, protective nature, when I tell you, like, that doesn't happen out in the world. If a guy interrupts me, I don't have some other guy coming to my rescue being like, no, you interrupted her. Like, that level of respect, maybe not every man in the Bitcoin space is that respectful, but I have never felt, other than the, conference organizers being men that don't ask women to speak on conferences and even on podcasts, like the male podcasters, I don't think they think of the women. Like, there have been times when this is a little bit of a tangent, I've seen podcasts with guests on them that were 1 degree or 2 degrees removed from something that I was more expert in, and they didn't ask me to be on it, but the next, someone else that was kind of adjacent or involved. And it wasn't, I even thought, like, is it something, am I not eloquent enough? Am I not interesting? Do I need to have a follower count to, I kind of had a moment and realized, no, I think it's just, there is a tendency for men to just have men be on the podcast versus
Do you not think though
reaching.
that that is kind of normal? Like guys hang out together and they chat together and they feel comfortable in each other's company. So to me, it almost seems like if you view your podcast, which I think many men do, as like an opportunity to hang out with your mates, then your mates are going to be guys, and you're all going to sit there and like I was listening to a Swan Cafe podcast yesterday, and I was listening to it specifically because Nuclear Bitcoiner was on it, and I wanted to hear what he had to say about SMRs. And so I was listening to it because I wanted. So an hour and 40 minutes into this podcast, it finally gets to the bit where he's talking, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I was forwarding because I was trying to find the bit where he was actually going to talk about SMRs. But the beginning of it was them all talking about the 4th of July. I'm a fireman, I'm a volunteer fireman. Oh, were there sirens going off all the way? I mean, this went on for ages. And I was like, wow, this is just like, I feel like I hacked into somebody's Zoom call and I'm just listening to their private conversation. And that's what it is. It's just like they're hanging out and having a good time together and chatting.
And I absolutely agree. And that's kind of, that was my conclusion, rather than, having my feelings hurt or thinking I'm inadequate or something. It was like, no, this is kind of their bro time. This doesn't mean that they don't value me and my opinions because they're not platforming them. In some ways, I almost, how cool is it that I'm just friends with these podcasters and I'm not a get for them to bring on the pod. I'm not like someone there's no angle. They just enjoy, I talk to them in person or, maybe on Telegram or DMs, and it's not that
Mm.
I'm a part of their work. And I think that's kind of where sometimes at conferences, I do get a little like, wow, if a woman was involved in the programming, there's just a little bit more of a visibility. There's a different vantage point. And I'm kind of the advocate of women have a place in the workplace. I'm not saying like no women with jobs, but I do think there are really strategic places that when you don't have a female perspective, you kind of limit your growth. And it's something I've talked to a lot of Bitcoin companies in early stages, that I'm not saying that you need a full-time woman, but especially with your user experience, with your UX, with your UI, like there are just the way that men's brains and women's brains work, there's just a difference in perspective. And I think the more that, the aesthetics and the flow and the logic can kind of interoperate between both sexes, I think it's just a more efficient path, at the end of the day. So no, I absolutely agree with your summary. And this is why this podcast feels very like I don't have to keep up or show that I'm bringing value. I'm not like keeping up with the guys is sometimes what it feels like. I was on a Twitter space last week, and it was one of the first, actually it was the most fun. I told Thomas this, the Thursday they do meetups at Pubkey. Once a month it's lightning, once a month it's mining focused, and then there's two other kind of varying topics. But before the meetup, they do a Twitter spaces that anyone can tune into, kind of like a pre-show. And it was very fun. The meetup last week was mining focused, and they were discussing the new 𝗙𝗪𝗋𝗋 report. And it was Marty and Drew and Thomas and Alex Thorne from 𝗙𝗪𝗋𝗋𝗋, and someone else. There was maybe one. It was like a party rip. We had all these microphones and headphones at the end of the bar in the little nook and chit-chatting. And I have to say, I had fun at it. I didn't feel like I was crashing the guy party, which often I'm like, I don't need to be on it, but it was my first time at Pubkey since joining the team. And I'm still kind of rolling out I haven't made like a public announcement that that's where I am. Once we're launching content, I will, but right now it's just kind of been word of mouth. It's not a secret. It's, I left on really good terms from Bitcoin Magazine, and a lot of what I was building at Bitcoin Magazine, was with the same vision of making high quality content for a wider audience. So super in line with everything, and they're really supportive of me at Pubkey. But I want to listen back to it. I almost feel like the Twitter spaces that we had was chaotic, but it actually was a flow of a conversation. And I didn't feel like I was going to derail it if I brought something up or said something. And I'm always mindful of like curating a conversation and you know, not kind of going upstream when we're kind of going downstream. But anyway, it was really remarkable. And I said to Thomas, you know, that was actually probably the most fun I've ever had on a Twitter space. And Drew made a joke. He's like, I don't think we've ever had a woman on a Twitter space before. I'm like, well, it was cool to be able to, you know, not have to be one of the guys. Like, I don't like to have to demote myself to be a guy, to be with guys, but also I don't want
Demote
them
myself. I love that. Was that a Freudian slip there?
But you know, like I like to carry myself as a lady, and I think that, you know, guys have a different level of casual conversation. And every once in a while, I'm like, I think you forget that I'm a lady and that I'm present. You know, there's conversations where I'm like, okay, guys, I don't need this right now. But I just honestly feel like it's easy and nice to have a conversation with a woman too. And it's very refreshing to not be hated for the things that I say, because I think a lot of women feel that I'm attacking them when it's not my intention at all for anything that I'm saying. It's more, hey, this is my discovery of what I believe, and if it resonates with you, come along for the ride. But I get it. I'm either developing a thick skin or I'm not cut out for this. And I think it's probably one or the other. But the kickback from various pieces, it's tough to be saying things that are unpopular.
What, from your Substack?
Yes.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, let's dive into that then, because I'm really curious about that. Because I don't know, so I'll give you some backstory in this as well, because I've kind of puzzled about why there weren't more women that were prominent in Bitcoin. And I had a really interesting conversation at Thank God for Bitcoin with Luke Broyles. And he said to me, I said to him, oh, I think women are more risk aware. So they're kind of a bit more tentative about coming into this space. And he said to me, well, I think that, you know, men tend to score higher on the bell curve of being disagreeable versus women who are higher on agreeable. And obviously, like, there's a range and not everybody fits into that. But at the extremes, that's where you see. And I actually thought about it and I was like, you know, I think I'm right, but I think he's more right. And what's interesting is, I'd done Jordan Peterson's psychology course in, I think it was January last year. And part of that, he gets you to do the 5 behaviors personality test. So I score really high on, well, not really high, but I score like 72% on compassion. I score 1% on politeness. So I'm like massively up on the disagreeable scale. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because that now explains to me why I go on Twitter and I'm like, oh, this is such a healthy debate. Everybody's kind of talking about stuff and really shooting the shit. And my friends, I go, look at this. Isn't this really interesting, this conversation? And they're like, this is awful. I'm not going on Twitter. God, is that what it's like? Oh my God, these people are assholes. Like, that's the response that they have. And so I just thought that that was really interesting, because I was like, there's definitely a space where a large proportion of women are more comfortable. And I mean, I've worked at an interdealer broker, which was basically like Wolf on Wall Street. And I actually loved that environment. I found it so liberating, because I could just say what I wanted. Nobody took offense. Like, when the guys had a disagreement, it was like, let's go outside and have a punch up. Like, there was none of this kind of like that. And I just found it so freeing, because you could just, like, you know, nobody got offended. So it tells you a lot, I think, about my psychology and why I've had kind of that response. But I'm really curious as to, so to put that in context of your newsletter, I found your newsletter really interesting because I found it quite challenging. I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. oh, I'm not sure I agree with that, or do I? So to me, it was just like another debate. I was like, this is another vector of a debate, and I find it really fascinating and I want to dive into it. So tell me about the responses that you've had.
Wow. First I want to unpack two things. When you said a punch out, they would go outside and punch each other?
Yeah.
It's
This
amazing.
was I mean, if it got that bad, I mean, God, I'll have to tell you these stories offline because I'm sure I would get all sorts of
Okay.
banned for this, that, and the other. But yeah, I mean, and like it was just what I observed is that men have a very different way of dealing with like conflict resolution, and they don't spend a lot of time being offended. And so I think a lot of the conversation that happens, like for example, I quite often read tweets from one prominent Bitcoiner to another, like men, and they say stuff to each other that I'm like, did you really need to put that out in the public sphere or say that in that way? Or was that really necessary? Like, take it offline. And if a woman did that to another woman, that would be like a I am never speaking to you for the rest of my life type thing. Guys just don't seem to have
Absolutely.
that. So, mm,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. And this goes back to the incentive model of Twitter, why it works with men and it doesn't work with women in a I don't think it works for women in a very lovely, life-giving way. Because yes, you could post pictures of yourself being attractive and beautiful things. It's true, but like that would also, like, what that does is it actually polarizes your male and female audience. And so men, you will get a lot of views from men, and depending on like how sexual the photos are, probably bookmarks too. So this is part of my like, I'm in this very angsty phase of social media is conditioning women to OnlyFans, and OnlyFans is conditioning for it's like a whole peel the onion back. But I'm really like wrestling through that whole issue. But I think the incentive model for women on Twitter, it's not, they don't come on there saying, wow, to bring life into the world is so, like, that's not what works. It's like, no, you say, you insult people, right? You say something really funny, you say something inappropriate. It's always pushing limits. It's not just taking pictures, showing pictures of beautiful things. This is why the Instagram incentive model is actually very feminine. I'm not saying men can't use it, but I think how it's created, where it's almost a competition of beauty, and yet it's a very manipulative. I am calling women manipulative, but it is kind of like, it's something about our nature that we're playing 3D chess or 4D chess many times. And I think that's where Instagram, you post a photo that looks, for I'm making this up right now, but like it looks like you just rolled out of bed, but you're in really chic pajamas and beautiful hair and makeup, right? But like it's the makeup that doesn't look like you're wearing any makeup, and you're having maybe a cup of coffee, or you're reading a book, but you're like, in that one photo, you are doing so much. And women understand what it is, but men don't. They're not looking at the nuance. And I'm not saying men are, they're looking at the face value and not the full stack underneath of everything that it's either insulting you or implying about this woman, or there's maybe she has insecurities and maybe she's playing into, I mean, Instagram is a wild, wild world, because it is preying upon people's inadequacies and deepest insecurities. And so the algorithm that you are creating by what you like or what you don't like, and how long you look at something and who you look up, like all of that data that you feed to this machine is giving you the perfect cocktail to rattle you, to not bring joy and encourage you, but to make you jealous, or compare. It's always comparison. It's always so. Pinterest, while having a similar algorithm in the sense that it's, you know, taking in what you like, Pinterest is more life-giving because you are then maybe going to do that for yourself, versus Instagram, it's the thing with the person. It's that package deal. So I think it's very damaging for women. I think it's very damaging for everyone. Honestly, I think it's really bad. I know it's really bad for me. And I think, you know, it either reminds me of like, oh, I didn't get invited to this wedding or to this party or whatever, or, oh, my friends. And it's like, I wouldn't have wanted to go, but I didn't get invited. So the fact that I don't even know that it exists because I'm not on social media is incredible. But I also think
it's interesting though. One thing I would comment on that is I do think there is a little bit of a male version of that, and I would describe it as like the steak gym workout on Twitter. You know, so the men do have their version where it's like they're all trying to outmax each other and be more carnivore, more muscly, more masculine, more like I've got a gun, I'm going out hunting. There is that version, which maybe they don't suffer from as much. They don't get as much of a sense of inadequacy.
no, you're right. I think theirs though is honestly like competing for good. And I think a lot of the female competition is pretty not good. It's hard because men aren't they're not competing for things that are it's like they're not necessarily competing for male attention, or for female attention, sorry. Like they are a little bit, but they're more doing it for the other dudes. So it's like dude attention. Maybe some of their photos of their gym progress are more like they also want female attention, but I think that's kind of the difference. Whereas, you know, everyone knows women put on makeup and get dressed, yes, for some male attention, but it's more other women are going to notice way more what you're wearing than a man. Like it's honestly, I still sometimes I wish I could just for even 30 minutes be in a man's mind to understand how they don't understand, observe certain things. I would love for a brief moment to know how they view the world and think about things, because I could choose to get upset when, you know, there's this lack of basic awareness, but I know that it's not intentional. But what is going on up there? Because my brain is wired so hard into like observe, process. This is the kind of soap we get. Like, how do you not know what kind of soap we have? Like, but like that's my brain versus theirs. Anyway,
I'm sorry, that's just so hilarious that that is the thing that springs to mind for you is soap.
it just happened, and I think it's ridiculous that now I'm talking about it, but I like a certain scent of soap. I do. And we were getting low on hand soap, and like I even pointed out that the soap that's under the sink, and it's the same scent for the dish soap and the hand soap in the kitchen. I pointed out that the soap refill is under the sink for the dish soap, and that's the scent. Mind you, this is a light blue label. And I like we had the conversation, and then yesterday, and I feel awful. It was like, thank you for going out and getting soap. And he shows me, and it's a light purple label, and it is the same brand of soap, but it's not the same scent. And and I had to just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It's just like, he's like, is this the right one? I'm like, no. No, but thank you so much for getting soap. I currently, this is a very confusing tangent, and then I will talk about
I'm going
the
to totally call this podcast Mills and I Talk About Soap. Tune in to hear about dish soap.
Oh, well, yeah. Snowdrop, for the record, Mrs. Myers. Just it's a great scent. It's seasonal, hard to find in his defense, but a slight explanation, and this is I was like, is there a way I can tell the story that it doesn't automatically like I was like, no, I can't tell the story without explaining that I live with a guy, but I actually live with three guys currently. And it's been a very interesting couple months of what is my life? I never thought that I would be a single woman in my early 30s, living with three young 20s men.
Oh my
And
God. I think you have to expand on this so people know that it's not a harem.
exactly. Well, I know it's funny, my sister-in-law is like, this is, if you want a godly conservative man, he's no, like this, it's indecent, it's inappropriate for you to be under the, and I'm like, I know, but also extenuating circumstances. So I was living in a duplex. There's a cooler British term that I learned recently, but like the half share, flat share. But
Oh,
it was a fully divided house in like probably the 80s, but it's 100-year-old home. And so I had one side, and I came to know these three guys had the other side. And so we got to know each other, packages would go to the wrong place. I'd have parties, people would go to their house. We got to know each other eventually. And then the plumbing is super old house. The plumbing was giving up. It was done. And the owners of this property, they wanted to develop, and so they didn't really want to repair. So the next door house that was recently vacated, we all moved from the two separate houses to one big house together. So it was a little
nice.
like they just transferred our leases over. And so we have this till the end of the year. So we're finishing out our leases. I don't know if this is something that I'm gonna repeat. Who could say? But it's been a very interesting, like I knew, and we talked about it going into this, like, I'm not gonna be your mom. I'm not gonna be the one to clean everything all the time. And yet I've been practicing, like, how can I be in my feminine frame? How can I empower them to be in their masculine frame? And they're young 20s. Their brains, their prefrontal cortex is not even formed, but they are really great guys, and it's been very surprising. So yes, I had this whole soap thing with one of my housemates. But I think it's been fun to even see how much they like the beauty. They let me decorate the whole place. They like everything is basically as I wish it. I have my own bathroom, and I kind of have like one wing of the house. I have this room, which is my office, and then a bedroom, but it's very interesting, like a little I learn a lot from them. I've lived with my brothers, but I've never lived with guys before. So it's just very interesting. They're all such unique, routines and various. But anyway, long rant. I don't even know how the soap came up. But Instagram, Twitter, bringing it all back to, I have gotten, and I think partly it's not a bad thing, but people read my Substack that are very liberal. And that is a lot because, well, and I think it's very funny bringing it back to one of the very first things you said on this call. You said you thought you were going to disagree, or you thought I was going to be liberal.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one of those, to qualify that. I just find all of these definitions have become so ridiculous, to be honest. Because I would say when I moved to the US, I was probably like a Bernie Sanders camp. I was support, but I feel like that was more, I grew up in a world where like a national healthcare system is the norm, and all of these things are the norm. I mean, I'm half Finnish. Finland is extremely socialist. It's when I say socialist, I mean that term, when you say it in the US, it has a very different connotation, I think. But Finland is a high tax jurisdiction. There are a lot of government services. Maternity leave is extremely long and very well subsidized, like all of these kinds of things. So when I rocked up in the US, I was just kind of like, whoa, people don't have maternity leave here. This is nuts, that kind of stuff. But I feel like the left is a little bit crazy in the US, and it's got crazier over the last few years. And I would describe it, and I say this to people, and I see the same thing in Canada. The term liberal here is used for political parties and for a certain political leaning. But what it actually is in practice is like left wing authoritarian. It's not actually liberal. And what I've observed is what I would have classically defined as right wing is actually liberal. So many people that sit on the right are supportive of gay marriage. I'm sure you probably, as a Christian, don't take this position, but they believe that a woman has a right to have an abortion. I think that there are people on that scale, and I would sort of define those generally as like liberal positions. But I would say to people when they would ask me my political leaning when I first moved to the US, I'm right wing liberal. That term in North America is nonsensical because people
Yeah.
associate the word liberal with left wing. But technically speaking, when you describe somebody's political leanings, it's correct. Like, I don't believe in just a free for all. I don't think things should be in a chaotic disorder. I think that, criminals should be put in jail. There should be, tough punishments to disincentivize bad behavior, which I think are probably quite right wing positions. But I also think that, it's none of my business what anybody else does with their marital choices. If you're gay and you want to get married, and you're a consenting adult, you're both consenting adults. I don't think that I should have any right or jurisdiction to tell you what you can and can't do. I can disagree with it personally, but that should not give me the right to and I don't, by the way, I mean, I don't disagree with gay marriage, but I don't think that I should have the right to tell you what you can and can't do. And so it's interesting to me because I think that that term liberal gets used in North America to actually describe like left-wing authoritarian very often. Um, and so unfortunately the word has a meaning, which is liberal, but it's become bastardized. But I think the title of your Substack, Feminine Agency, and the kind of preamble that you give very much led me to believe that this was going to be somebody who sat there moaning about the fact that all men are terrible, and if only, that was my expectation. And so I was quite surprised that some of the content, I wouldn't say it veers in that direction, but some of the content, it sort of prods those buttons, and then it just completely goes to another, like you go in a completely different direction the rest of the newsletter. And so I don't know if you're doing this spontaneously or if it's just very clever, but it's very disconcerting is the wrong word. It kind of forces you out of your little boxes of that you want to put people in. Oh, this person is, they have this opinion, therefore they must also have that opinion. And so I find it just very interesting. It's very confronting. I think you read it and you go, I can't really form an opinion about Mills that I can box neatly into a thing and say she's left wing, she's right wing. And I really like that about it.
Well, and that is intentional in that my through line through everything is curiosity. And it's not like I am not writing the 10 commandments that I have figured it out, everyone. And actually, I hate the word triggered because it's been so, you said it, bastardized. It's been so drug, but I got a comment that it was kind of because I was talking about the Equal Rights Amendment and conscription, and it was something, who saying this to me, that anyone that you think should have the right to vote. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. In no way has any of my writing ever been, this is what I think, and everyone should think this. And the fact that I, got misunderstood in that way was frustrating to me, because that's never my intention. And the desire is for, I want to take a thing that maybe I thought was true, or maybe I didn't think was true, or that I didn't really know what I thought about something. And then I want to like chip away at it, because I think there's just all these inherited, I almost think of them as kind of like passive travelers, that you don't necessarily, go into a library, check out a book, read a book on a thing, and then say, I believe in this. But by living in 2023, in, whatever culture you live in, you have to believe something about it. And, I think gay marriage is a great one. I think there's a really good line of, where does my personal belief need to end? And that boundary means a lot to a lot of different people. And I don't think everyone is critically, not in a negative connotation critically, but like with intent detail, looking at, where does my personal belief line need to end? And then I can have a margin for people that don't agree with me. And I think, the thing that I loved a lot about my education was there was always room for disagreements. Disagreement was probably like the backbone. And, I learned very, very much. I went to it was a interdisciplinary critical thought program, and it was a few months.
I saw that on your LinkedIn. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
And it was all Socratic, and it was honestly, and he recently passed, or maybe in the past few years. The professor that was our resident, the resident professor, we had many visiting professors. He was a master at the Socratic method to really, we're young, but we're having to define, what is a human? What is beauty? What is goodness? And what is truth? If you have never had to explain to someone, they're tough questions. And he would poke and prod. And I know, leaving that, I had a definition for what I think art is that I would have never gotten to had I not had that friction. And it wasn't, you need to believe, it wasn't the indoctrination catechism of, you need to believe these things. It's, how are you choosing your beliefs, and in what, what system? And I think, yes, from a like worldview standpoint, this was one of the first pieces I published on feminine agency. Like, you believe in something, even if you believe nothing matters, and your nihilism is like kind of a cop out in my opinion, in that, like, okay, you believe in nothing really being true, but that's contradictory, because you believe that is the truth. So that's an absolute. If there are no absolutes, like, you get down this
Would you
logical
say
train.
nihilism is not believing in truth, or would it say just nothing matters? It's ultimate, if you take it to its ultimate extreme.
Nothing matters, but I think a lot of people don't go to that extreme, and they kind of stay in the base camp of, it doesn't, there is
Everything's
no,
subjective.
yeah, I think it's just like low rent not moral relativity always, but like relativity of just, there's no purpose of point. And
Wait,
if
one
you
sec, my
do,
dog's barking. I'm just gonna go hold that thought. You're right. Do you want to go outside? Sorry, I think they might want to go outside, but he's barking, so I'm not sure why. It's fine. Bed, your bed. Sorry about that. He was just really going for it, and I was like, is he going to shut up? And then I was like, maybe somebody's breaking into the house.
yeah. Oh,
Sorry to Can you imagine?
That would be a really good police report. No, I do think though that that there is like the choice for belief, it feels, and I'll say it in a different way. I think tolerance is something that has been used to say something, but it really has meant something else. Whereas tolerance as a theory, it should be that there is this margin, right? There's this camp over here and there's this camp over here. And tolerance allows there to be peace between the two. But what has mainly happened is that tolerance only goes one direction. And there is no tolerance, because if you go this direction, you're a transphobe, bigoted, hateful, you're all these things. And I'm not saying those could be things that are going up that way, but the tolerance has not had any flexibility and nuance. And I think partly, and this is me, I'm not like, this is a working theory, but there's a book by Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I was just talking to a friend actually that I went to the same critical thought program and the same college. And so we were talking about just the state of disagreement and discussion and how that's just gone. Like, I don't like going to parties very much, because what are we going to talk about? Like, nothing that I care about with any interest. But there was such a difference at these places because we knew there was an agreement that we could disagree and we could be friends and it didn't matter. And Neil Postman talks about the path. It's like the ideology with the least friction, the path of least resistance will be the most widespread adopted. And the tendency of that will lean towards a belief system that's more, I guess, in the left way of love and acceptance, and like that is easier. That's an easier sell. That is a more attractive sell than saying, yeah, people aren't good at their core. And there is, whether it goes into, faith as well, like there is a hell, and there, like those are hard truths. There is suffering. Good things don't always happen, only to good people. Like there is a fundamental, how you view the world, how you think the world works, that is influencing exactly what you're doing and how you're responding and reacting. And I think what Instagram did in like 20, I'd say 20 early teens, I think, I got it in 2011. I used to have Instagram. And I think what it did was homogenize in a very terrifying way. This is the group think. And now it's spread out to everyone. And it seems like it's your choice. And it seems like it's your idea. And you esteem these different people because it looks nice, but they're sending you a curation of what will work. So anyway, long diatribe on, I don't really know what was the jumping off, but some of my readers do not get the nuance that it is, it's an invitation to discuss. I don't always want to debate. A lot of the reason that I'm writing in this way is I want to explain myself and be heard, but I also am not trying to get up on a stage and debate, a super feminist. I think I want people to have information and have solidarity. If they want to deconstruct the feminism ideology that they got just handed, if they're not satisfied with their lives, if they are feeling disillusioned, I think I want them to say, hey, this is encouraging. There's someone else that's going through it and processing a lot of it. And that would be my long-term hope. I do really, you mentioned it kind of in passing, but I really want to do meetups for women to talk. But my fear is, at least in New York, I'm like, who would come? I
Well,
my
I
friends
think it
don't even know I write this.
really, oh God. Am I about to out you? They probably don't watch
They
YouTube or
won't
Twitter
see this
anyway.
podcast either.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So to go back to the comment that you said that somebody gave you on your Substack, I mean, the way that I interpret that is that individual wasn't interested in exploring and having a good faith conversation. They just wanted to trigger a debate and have an angry response. And I do find that is probably the one thing I would say on social media and Twitter is what I call like anon basement dwellers. You know, there are people that sit there behind anon accounts who, you know, are probably like very dissatisfied with their lives, and they're just looking for something to get into an argument with somebody about, and it's not an opportunity to have a space to learn and to discuss. So that was that. I mean, yeah, for me, I mean, I think what I take away from your Substack is that it is this kind of it's more posing a question than trying to take a very strong position and give an answer. But I think part of the problem is that many people struggle dealing in nuance. You know, they want to categorize, and I think the human brain probably lends itself to that. You know, we have so much information overload to deal with, so I have to look at Mills and go, oh, this is her political position, therefore she must also think this, and I can put her in that box and then move on. And I noticed that it's quite disconcerting for people if they find that they can't box you in. You know, like they'll want to say, like somebody said to me recently, well, I think you're really right wing, not knowing any of my opinions. And I thought and I was just like, all right, fine, you can think that. I don't really care. Like, think what you like. Define right wing for me. What do you mean by that statement? Um, and it's interesting for me, I mean, just an anecdote as well, because when, you know, I grew up in a country where there is no gun proliferation. So I moved to the US and I was just like, good Lord, like all these people do is debate abortion and debate guns. Like, can we just move on from this already? Like the rest of the world has pretty much solved this, or the rest of the Western world, I should say. It's not even a thing. And then COVID happened, and I saw just like some really frightening authoritarian behavior from all Western governments in concert, acting in unison. Countries like Australia, like New Zealand, that have always, Canada, where I am, have always been considered bastions of liberty and freedom and human rights, suddenly just descending into this authoritarianism, but like at breakneck speed. And it was interesting because in August last year, I went and did like a road trip for a friend's birthday. And we went to, it was all the way from South Dakota to Yellowstone. And we stopped off at the place where they had the Battle of Little Bighorn. And there was a lady called Rose who was part of the Crow Nation, and she gave us a tour. And kudos to her, like she didn't mince her words at all about like the colonizers and everything else. Like she was very polite to everybody, but very upfront about what she thought. But what was interesting was we stopped for lunch at the Crow trading post, like the Crow reservation trading post. Everywhere there's like Second Amendment things, the right to bear arms. And what I discovered was that like a lot of Native Americans are very supportive of the Second Amendment because they, in very recent history, remember that when their guns were taken away from them and they gave them up, that was when they then ended up on the reservations. And it really gave me pause for thought because I thought to myself, you know, it's interesting when you grow up in a certain environment, to your point, it kind of shapes how you think. You know, it happens subconsciously, but it shapes how you view the world and what you think is important. And when you haven't walked in somebody else's shoes, you don't really understand like their reality and what they've dealt with and why they may view the world in a certain way. And there's this sort of like very left-wing view of like, oh, Indigenous rights. But if you turned around and said, yes, Indigenous rights, they should all be armed to the back teeth, then, you know, like people would suddenly be like, oh, no, 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 no. And it's very hard, I think, for people to have those two positions then coexist. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. It's kind of, I mean, back to your example with gay marriage, right? There is this, it's either, you know, every gay person is going to hell, or, you know, the slippery slope to pedophilia, bestiality, whatever. Like my Twitter is like that. That's part of why it's not a very fun place for me, my feed. But it's nuance. And the way I describe when someone asks me very point blank, like, what do you believe about this or that, any specific issue, if I don't actually have a very thought out stance, sometimes I'm like, that isn't an actively necessary issue for me to have a decision on, and I don't really know. And there are other things where I know exactly what I believe and why I believe it, and it's a tightly held belief. But I find that if I tell someone I don't know why, I don't know what I believe about it or think about it, that's a very frustrating answer, like, to give to someone. And it's not, in my case, it's not because, like, I couldn't probably come to a decision, but I don't find that my life is forcing me to have this like distinct issue. And I think the right and left pull apart, polarizing, pitting against, that has been done by the media and by, corporations. Like, it's a paid separation and polarization that is happening. And I mean, I don't know, maybe that's an unpopular opinion or a wild conspiracy theory, but it just seems really blatantly obvious that has happened. The nuance that you're talking about, having that margin for, we're paying back the debt of colonizing and driving the Native Americans out of their land. There's that side, and then there's the Second Amendment side, that can't they be together? Can't they both be true at the same time and impact and influence? But there isn't always, and I guess I believe strongly in objective truth and reality, but I also think that there's a lot of dimension. And I think tangent to explain exactly what I think is happening with this compression of two sides, right and left, the binary. When you write a screenplay, there is character development, but there is only so much character development, because a real human, a real person, has so much data, has so many, there's so many things, especially an adult, has so many factors of who they are, the life experience that they've had, their personality, their quirks, their interests. It's too dynamic of a range. So what happens when you're writing a character to make them compelling? You pick a few things and give range on those few things. You don't give everything. That it would be miserable. It wouldn't be a compelling story. So you flatten a real life human into a character. And we think characters are real, but that's not, there is no one that is, those simplified, non-nuanced things. We see that in television, we see that all the time in movies, but that also is I think has affected dramatically that you can't, that's not real life. Does that make sense, that flattening?
It does. I was going to say, it's like a heuristic though, isn't it? It's because you need to kind of, when you're dealing with large numbers of people in your life, you need to kind of have a way of sifting, this person is like this, and you don't take things on their merit every time and just try and make an objective judgment. You just box things up. I mean, it is a heuristic, isn't it, really? But it works for many things, but just doesn't work for everything all of the time.
And I think it's been a coping mechanism because of the adoption of the internet and social media. I don't have technically probably a degree to make this observation, but what I think has happened is there is too much information. There is an overwhelming amount of access to information, access to communication, access to entertainment, to content. Like, there has never been this widespread, and I'm not saying every single place in the world has it as much as Western culture, but never in the entire history has this been the state of, you know, our 24 hours, you could do so many things, and yet people more than ever, I think, are in this need to numb, need to veg, need to binge a show, need to do something to rest their brain. But people's brains are so worked up that rest with nothing, with no music or visual or human, like, how many people do you know that spend hours without anything intentionally, which that is the majority of the entire human civilization, where now there is no room back to amusing ourselves to death. Like, this Neil Postman book was written, I think it was written in the 80s, but like, I've read few books that are as prophetic as predicting what has really transpired with this. Yeah, you get the dopamine. Yeah, you get the little bit of rush. Yeah, oh, you think you have a community virtually, and sometimes it does translate right to in-person relationships as well. And I'm definitely not saying let's all be Luddites. I think about it sometimes. I think about just like running away, but
joining the Amish.
well, that would be in some ways easier than, you know, moderation is actually much more difficult than, you know, cutting something out completely. It's like, okay, can I just have a little bit of something that is so addictive, created to be addicted? I mean, I don't know if you've watched any of the, I think, Distracted, or there was one about social media. It was like people that worked at Facebook and Google, The Social Dilemma.
Oh, yes, yes, I've seen that.
But it's like I feel like, you know, every time I reread Brave New World in 1984, I have a momentary like, anyone else? Is anyone else awake? And I think that's where, back to Bitcoin, and, you know, I guess there's that Venn diagram of the red pill and the orange pill and all the pills. But there is such a hope with the Bitcoin community, because they've extracted from the mainstream, and, you know, in their red pill journey, typically, you know, there's some economic awakening, or, you know, you see the system, you see the government controlling money, and, you know, like, I think it really is kind of a sequitur quite often for people. And I've talked about it a little bit on Feminine Agency. Like, I just never was mainstream. I never had a red pill moment because I never was in the normal. As I grew up in such a conservative, Christian, homeschooled, fringe family.
Are you
That,
homeschooled?
yes.
That's so interesting. That is
I
so
was homeschooled until
interesting.
high school. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting, because I see this pattern, this thread run through, where people who seem to have an ability to think a bit more independently. I mean, it seems kind of obvious when you say it, because they haven't gone through the school system. And I always think, when I hear this sort of like, oh, this indoctrination narrative, I'm like, oh, that feels a little bit like tinfoil hat to me. But then it's interesting to me, because I keep meeting people in the Bitcoin community who are homeschooled, and the way that their brains work is just completely different. There's a lot more critical thinking. It's just, that's so interesting. Sorry to to
Well,
pause on that, but
that's what I think. That's why I'm like, I'm gonna write this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna see how it goes, how much friction there is. I feel like I'm in many ways doing it for myself too, because it's a good opportunity for me to process and then share it. And I've actually, you know, there's been negative feedback, but there's been lovely, lovely feedback too. So it's, you know, I think it's that I try to like, I was like, I don't want to read the comments, but these are comments actually asking me questions. So then I have to read these comments, but it's going to be a little bit of a dance, I think, navigating as I continue. But the free thinking, every institution for the most part that I have been a part of was critical thinking, like, as the backbone. And it set me up, homeschooling set me up for read something, understand what it's saying, and then whether summarize or, be able to explain what it's saying, right? So just independent ability to consume information and regurgitate. And then that kind of went into symbolic logic, was probably at my first college, probably the favorite course that I took, because it was, okay, there's these argument structures, there's these models, there's these formulas for making an argument. I never did debate. I really, in some ways, not regret. Sometimes, some days I wish I had really, gotten into debate and to be able to like really share my opinions, but I don't feel like I'm the best in an argumentative state. Maybe if I would have done debate, I would be better. But then when I went to King's College, it was much more the philosophy of everything. And from King's, I did a tutorial at Oxford in that setting. I don't know how normal education prepares you to be in a tutor setting where it's one-on-one with a Don, that you are literally defending what you wrote. And so each week it would be, okay, you have to, we decide on the topic, but then I'd have to go read sections of 6 or 7 or 8 books, do the research, put it in my brain, then come up with something about it, not just regurgitating what they're saying, but also a viewpoint, which is, one step beyond mere understanding, right? So I feel like you say the indoctrination, it's like, oh, a little tinfoil hat. If you look at how the traditional educational system, it's almost, don't learn how to think for yourself. Don't learn how to see things from a different vantage point. Don't learn, how to question and challenge, because I think you have to go through those 3 stages, right? You have to comprehend, so be able to absorb and read and understand what something's saying, then be able to regurgitate it. Then once you can explain it to someone else, then you can move over here and see a vantage point on it. But if you don't have that, and maybe that's an oversimplification of the critical thinking process, but if you don't have that ability and those core muscles, because you've always been told to not do that, then it's so much easier to be controlled. And I mean, here is my tinfoil hat, but this is where, the indoctrination in Brave New World, where they play tapes for the babies. It's like, well, all these kids shows, they're slipping in the subliminal messaging. Sometimes it's not even subliminal. Sometimes it's really overt. And from the very beginning, if you're putting your kid in front of these YouTube shows or these, harmless, made for toddler programs, you're already giving them the keys to the wiring of the brain. Now we've completely devolved, and I am fully unhinged. Here we are.
I used to watch The Magic Roundabout when I was a kid, so I don't know what that did to my brain, because it's got all of these subliminal LSD type messages in there. As I found out as an adult, I said to my mum, I was like, oh my God, you used to put me in front of this on the TV. Like,
yeah. I mean,
explains a lot.
It's wild. Well, I mean, look at you now. It brought you here. We're all this, collection of experience and exposure.
Yeah.
So I think it's being careful as adults, being careful what we put in front of ourselves. I've challenged 2 of the guys in the house. They're joining me on a month without media, basically. So no, we can go to a movie in theaters if it's with friends, but otherwise, like, no TV, no video games, no movies. We can do audiobooks and podcasts. No YouTube, know any of that.
Yeah,
So
I have
it's
to
fun.
be honest, I'm a lot more productive when I'm not on Twitter and I'm not exposed to every single thing that's happening on the news cycle. And I kind of feel at the end of the day as well, a lot happier with like how I've spent my day. So I will say that much. But there is another part of me that's like, I actually find it really useful to follow people who keep me abreast of what's going on and to raise awareness of things. So I'm not just in this little peaceful bubble where I think the world is a wonderful place. So I'd say that's probably my observation. I don't know if you have time, but I would love to just circle back to Barbie because you brought Barbie up at the beginning, and I'd love to talk to you about that. My reaction to the whole Barbie thing, I have to be honest, Barbie was my favorite toy when I was a child. I loved everything about her. She was pretty, she had lovely clothes, and just really appealed to the visual side. And for me, when this whole Bitcoin Barbie thing came about, I was like, oh, this brings together two worlds that I love. And instead of being this very kind of technical, kind of, much more sort of masculine thing, suddenly there's Bitcoin Barbie. So for me, I mean, I haven't watched the movie, but I was like, oh, love it. And I know people have seen it. I've heard very different responses, but generally people have said to me that it's wonderful and they loved it. So I was really curious as to like your thoughts and I guess where are you at in this exploration of all things Barbie and your observations?
Sneak peek on my two-part. This is good accountability too, and then I will really have to do the polishing for this two-part Barbie piece. I played with Barbies growing up, and they were hand-me-downs from my cousin, and I probably had a lot more of the homemade dresses and furniture and stuff. It was just expensive, all the actual on-brand Barbie stuff, Barbie dream house, car, and everything. But in 1997, they released the first Barbie in a wheelchair. And it's like Becky with a smile or Smiling Becky or something. And I've observed Barbie as a company, Mattel, putting out these Barbies that were pandering to like, oh, we need to be more inclusive. Oh, we need to be more this. Oh, we need to do this. And I think, there's a difference between diversity and, more offerings. Like that's just good capitalism and that just makes lots of sense versus like, oh, we can't have Barbies be this skinny anymore. This is an unrealistic, I said something and I actually don't know. This was one of the biggest things that I'm like, as I read it back, I don't know that it reads well. They've made Barbie less beautiful. And what Barbie always was this prototype. And yeah, unrealistically large eyes and tiny waist and like, but fun and pretty to dress up, and a doll, not a real life human representation. It was a doll. And I think that premise, I loved playing dress up with Barbie. And yet I never was like, oh, I don't look exactly like Barbie. There's only, there's a few people I think that like did a lot of plastic surgery to look like Barbie, but Barbie was much more of a, a very feminine, fun doll. And it's been funny. I know a little bit about the production. Like, I think it's been 12 years. It's either 6 years or 12 years. For some reason, I'm having a hard time remembering between the two, that this movie was in different creative iterations. And like it originally was going to be Amy Schumer was going to be like an ugly version of a Barbie, but it wasn't feminist and cool enough for her. And so they turned it down. And then like this went through creative process. And I think a lot of it was Mattel is very protective of their brand and, didn't wanted to proceed with caution, which makes total business sense. But then Greta Gerwig, and this is also like very full circle back. Like I used to dream of being an Oscar-winning director. And, like I looked up to Sofia Coppola, Greta Gerwig, Lena Dunham even, and like they were doing it. And I actually, that's a
Girls
whole
was an
other.
awesome show, by the way. Can I just say that Lena Dunham show, Girls? I loved that show. I loved it. I felt like she went a bit unhinged afterwards as an individual, that show was awesome.
It was so good. And it was funny, even I remember being like career goals, man, I wish I could have worked on Downton Abbey, because I studied British cultural history from the Edwardian Victorian eras, but like wasn't at Oxford. This is what my tutorial was in, but I didn't do it early enough in my career to then have been able to work on Downton Abbey. So I missed that. And then girls, I actually got, this is a very random tangent, but I got a call from HBO and they were doing a finale, like Goodbye to Girls episode. And I got to production design that. And Adam Driver was filming Star Wars or something. But I got to work with every of the actors. It was the victory lap. They were in their last season shooting in New York. And that was a very like, I know God has it. I know he knew that was like a dream, but I got in right under the wire. Long tangent. Barbie. Greta Gerwig did a revisit, and this is when Margot Robbie was attached. And I think having not seen the movie, I have heard a lot of different responses from people. And I know that means either the creative is confusing, and sometimes when you have inherited so many different storylines or creative directions, sometimes it can feel non-cohesive. So that could be part of it. The other thing that could be part of it is on the Myers-Briggs scale, there's the intuiting and the sensing. And so it's the second letter, the INTJ, ENFP kind of thing. So the intuiting are much better at nuance and kind of world beyond the world. And sensing is much more face value and literal. And so not that they're not, able to have imaginations, but they're not as satirically minded or always thinking about nuance and interpreting what does this represent. It's more of a literal representation. So one of my theories is that the people that, the people that are sensing are seeing one thing, the people that are intuiting are seeing another thing. Maybe it's a confusing message. Maybe it's this whole, we have to have one viewpoint, and so you have to either like it or not like it. You can't think it was in between or something. But from what I do know, I think it's very funny that it seems like everyone has to have an opinion about it. You have to care, right?
It's the current thing.
but like I went to Oppenheimer the day they came out, either the same day. I went to Oppenheimer on the 20th, and I'm like, yeah, I could watch Barbie, and I could watch it when it's not in theaters. I don't need to see it in theaters. And then now everyone's talking about it, and part of me has almost wanted to go see it just so that I can have, be able to talk about it. And then I'm like, I don't need to go watch it to be able to talk about it. I'll wait. So anyway, those are my current thoughts on Barbie, but they prompted a lot of deeper things, which, another subliminal messaging. Barbie could do everything. Barbie could be a veterinarian. Barbie was a teacher. Barbie was a dentist, a doctor. She had all these different careers, right? And I don't know if you know this, there once was a pregnant Barbie, very short-lived. And then apparently it was like, parents don't want their children playing with a pregnant Barbie because teen pregnancy. That was literally the reason. And then there was also another Barbie that didn't last long either, that had a detachable stomach, which also was taken away. But I got really deep into my Barbie like rabbit hole of what is the purpose of Barbie? What is Barbie actually trying to, what is it trying to be? And then also the, oh, if you play with dolls, you're a girl, or you're gay, or you're trans, or whatever, or, if you're a tomboy, you want to, and like, I know a lot of my friends, we've talked like, I was a tomboy. I climbed trees. I played with neighborhood boys on the train tracks. Like I didn't want to be a boy, but I was definitely very much, you know, rough and tumble. You know, I wasn't all, I liked pink as an early young girl, and then I went through a long tomboy phase, and then, you know, went back to wearing dresses and skirts and heels and lipstick and all of these things. So I think that, you know, as we continue to compress, like there's binary. It's only you like this or you don't like. You either liked the movie or you didn't like the movie. You have to see it, or this is what we're talking about, or you're not in the mainstream. Like it's all of this binary. So I guess full circle, maybe you can just call this ramblings on nuance, because I feel like that kind of is the theme that I kind of, I don't know, I take away a little, like Barbie was telling us something, but I think at the end of the day it was also just a celebration of pretty and beauty, and I don't think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I remember like I still remember getting my first Barbie doll, and like I grew up in Italy, and there was this little shop, like a toy shop that, you know, all kids love a toy shop. And it was like a couple months leading up to Christmas, and there was this rock star Barbie, and she was in the window of the toy shop, and she had her little rock star outfit and everything else. And she had, I think, pink cowboy boots and just, you know, yeah. And I just remember walking past this shop, and like every weekend, I'd go to the market with my mum in the centre of town, and I would walk past and I'd go, "Can we stop at the shop?" And I would stand at the window and look at this Barbie. Anyway, on Christmas Day, I got Barbie. My mum had kindly gone and bought this doll for me. And I just remember being absolutely overjoyed at this like little, she had a little pink fluffy top and her cowboy boots and her microphone that went on her hand. And oh my God, I mean, I was just like over the moon with my, I still have the Barbie now. I'm very sentimentally attached to her. But it was very much for me like a kind of celebration of, I don't know, I guess she was aspirational. She was the kind of girl that I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted a nice pink top with my pink cowboy boots and to be Barbie. And I think also it's a kind of a you totally oversharing my Barbie experience here, but you sort of, you know, also kind of navigate the world. You know, it's like when you have dolls. I mean, I always find it really interesting that children, like little girls, like to have baby dolls that they push around in prams. So they, or buggies, as you'd say in the US. But you know, it's you're kind of acting out this thing and you're role playing. And I remember at some stage having Ken and Barbie, and I'd strip their clothes off and put them in bed together. I'd no idea what they were going to be doing in bed, but I was just like, I know that adults take their clothes off and go into bed together, so Barbie's going to do that with Ken.
But that's like human, right? Because we are mimetic. We imitate. That's how we learn, and that's actually, you know, it's explorational. I think. I mean, that's exactly right. And if a boy wants to carry around a doll, like okay, that's fine too. And if a young girl wants to pretend that she's breastfeeding her baby doll, that's amazing. That's like she's
Yeah.
seeing, she's imitating, and I think that's. I mean, maybe I'm outdated. I've always felt like I was born in the wrong era. You know, I would say I've felt trans age before you could be trans everything. I've always been like, is this the right day and age that I'm supposed to live in? But here we
Yeah, I mean,
are.
I just think that we're going through a very strange phase. I mean, it's funny what you said, you mentioned about pink and pretty. So I have a friend whose little daughter, when she was like 2 months old, my friend was very much, I mean, this is way before the whole trans thing became a thing, but she was very much into just like not imposing. I remember she made a comment to me. She said, "I don't think she's a pink girl." So she had a lot of yellow outfits and things like that. They were kind of a bit more neutral. And then she told me at one point, she said, you know, it's like if I try and put a yellow outfit on her, she'd push it. And this is like when she was just a few months old, she'd push it away as she only wanted to be dressed in pink. And I was just like, God, that's so interesting. And I don't know a single little girl virtually that doesn't love pink or doesn't love pretty things. You know, so I do think that there is something inherent about that. I don't think it's culturally imposed to the degree that people imply. Um, and I also think, to your point about Instagram, that women are much more into visual, beautiful things, you know, as evidenced by the fact that we care far more about the environment that we live in and what it looks like. There's a reason why girls' bedrooms are generally cleaner and prettier, and boys' bedrooms just smell like bad socks and are filled with electrical equipment, you know?
Yes. Oh, it's so, I live in that, I mean, I won't even.
Totally. Well, gosh, we're nearly running at 2 hours. So thank you so much, Mills. This has been so interesting. I can't wait to see your post about Barbie. I'm going to be all over that. And I'm going to post a picture because I bought one of 𝗙𝗙𝗋𝗋's FOMO t-shirts with the Bitcoin Barbie, which I'm really excited to post.
I love it. I love it so much. This has been
It is the
honestly,
fulfillment of my dreams. But yes, and I think you should do like a women's space, or just call it feminine agency, and do something in the parlor at Pubkey. I mean, when I'm next in New York, I'd love to come to that. And I think, it doesn't have to be like no boys allowed, but it could just be, a conversation about some deeper philosophical
it could
musings.
be you and me. You underestimate that other people are interested, at least at this point. I think that is, I want to get there, but I feel like I'm basically talking into a void still at this point. This would be the first evidence that I'm not talking into a void. I've mentioned my writing on a few different podcasts, but typically if I'm doing an interview or a podcast, it's about Bitcoin and it's not about this passion project side hustle. So thank you. My first official interview actually talking about feminine agency.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, I hope to continue the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.